Hey there. In this video, I'm going to talk about the witch's tea ceremony. It's a little something that I think is fun and that some of you might enjoy incorporating if you don't already do something similar. I'll preface this video by saying that I don't know whether I will have gotten around to posting an olfactory processing video or a video about the use of scent in one's practice. And so I don't know how much overlap there will be in terms of information that I include about scent, which is to say that if you find this repetitive in spots, I'm sorry about that. I will try not to repeat myself over much. So in terms of my practice, I feel like there's a very strong place for sensory experience and taking advantage of one's senses in ritual and spellcraft, and even when engaging with the tarot. Many of you will be quite familiar with the concept of pathworking with the tarot, and this little ceremony is really designed around expanding that, including smell and gustatory stimuli, to really engage with different aspects of the card that you're pathworking. Today I'm going to be doing this with the Seven of Cups, and I have chosen to make 3 different teas, each of which represent different aspects of the card, each of which will serve as a stand-in for, well, one of the cups in the card. If you were so inclined, you could do this with all 7 cups, but that seems like an awful lot of fluid intake to me. I'm not sure I could sit through something like that. You can, of course, modulate the amount of tea, and in the case of doing 7 cups, I would suggest perhaps doing 7 shot glasses worth of tea, an ounce or 30 ml for you non-American folk who enjoy the metric system. But really, this can be personalized in any way you see fit. And if you haven't tried something like this, I do encourage you to, because I think it's fun. I think there is a great deal we can gain from incorporating tactile experience and particularly olfactory experience in our practice. Because I will be getting into the concept of olfaction and memory and associations in a decent amount of depth, probably too much depth if I know myself at all, in the olfaction video, I'll stick to more of the basics, more of the practical aspects here. Now, this is the sort of thing that you can do alone or you can do with a friend. If you practice with somebody, if you circle, this can be quite fun. For instance, if you were doing a joint pathworking, one of you could have a tea that's representative of one aspect of the card, and the other could have a tea that taps into the feel, the concepts of the other aspect of the card, even the reversal meanings of the cards. And then when you both surface, you can compare your experiences, see where they overlap, see where they don't. But of course, you can do it alone, as I'm about to here. So as we go, I'll just kind of walk you through my thought processes, how I select herbs and other things to use in the teas, and in general, how I structure this process. So for this witch's tea ceremony, if you're using it in conjunction with tarot for pathworking, I certainly suggest that you figure out what card you're going to be pathworking with beforehand, and let that card inform your selection of herbs. Now, if you are not as familiar with herbs, that's okay. If you are and you have strong correspondences already, that may facilitate your selection of teas. But I also think that in addition to being very helpful with pathworking and tapping into the feel of various aspects of your cards, this is a really great way to get to know herbs. There are endless lists of associations, but at the end of the day, I really think that for those herbs you can taste and try, that's really the best way to become familiar with them. Just because Scott Cunningham thinks that chamomile is an herb associated with love doesn't mean you have to embrace that concept. And the associations that herbs develop over time, ones that are based on myth and history, well, there are a lot of factors that go into them, right? There's a visual component, how the herb looks when it's growing, how it looks when it's dug up. Mandrake's a great example of this. The root system of that particular plant and its similarity to the human form is really the source of a great deal of myth and legend about the herb itself. There are the biological or physiological aspects of the herbs, whether that is the medicinal value of the herb, long-standing use for particular ailments or in particular contexts, or psychotropic aspects. So again, we can go to mandrake. The fact that the root system looks like a person adds one component to the legend and the history and the associations of that herb, but the fact that it'll also kill you if you're not careful adds a different layer of meaning and context to it, and its identity sprung from all of those sources. But so too does the taste, the flavor, the scent of herbs and flowers. Those herbs that became popular, that are used regularly, will often be associated with pleasant and pleasing things, which should be unsurprising because of course they had to have been pleasant and pleasing enough to be widely adopted. Teas and herbal infusions are imbibed by a huge chunk of the population that have no interest whatsoever in whatever subtle medicinal effects those drinks may offer them. They're drinking those teas because they're yummy. And popularity and general positive feeling are going to be reflected in the legend, the myth, the lore, the associations of those herbs. All of which is to say that there is a bias, a tendency toward things that smell or taste good to be associated with pleasant feelings, pleasant atmosphere. And that can be advantageous, but associations can be more complex than that. Your personal experiences with a smell that's generally considered pleasant may leave you disliking it, and that's fine. For you, those associations matter more than what the popular perception is. There are also a lot of herbs that have more depth than people give them credit for. Herbs that, at face value, aren't necessarily delicious or pleasant, but that you may find encapsulate a concept better than anything else on the shelf that you would naturally be inclined to make a tea with. But whatever associations you bring to the table with any individual plant, there are a few things that are obviously important to keep in mind. And this is doubly true, or triply true, if you're having more than one cup of a particular kind of tea. And although I appreciate that many of you will know this, and don't need to be lectured about it, I am going to include these warnings just in case, because I'd rather be safe than perhaps play a role in somebody doing something dangerous that they will come to regret. The first is that it's very important to keep in mind that some herbs that are popularly used in the craft are toxic, they're dangerous. Some of them are inappropriate to drink. But even those herbs that are safe can be safe sometimes only in particular quantities. There are herbs that are slightly toxic or toxic if imbibed over time, repeatedly, and you have to keep that in mind. If you're doing this on a day-to-day basis, you want to make sure that you're not using an herb that is damaging to your kidneys or your liver with repeated use. Another thing to keep in mind is that some of these herbs do have medicinal properties. Some of them are more potent than others, which is to say that if you're going to be drinking 3 medium-sized teas in quick succession, you want to make sure that you're not piling all 3 of them with, for instance, sedatives. Chamomile, for instance, is quite a mild sedative. You're probably okay having a decent amount of that. But if your first cup of tea is chamomile, your second is a heaping couple teaspoons of skullcap, and you polish all of that off with valerian root, you're going to knock yourself out. So, as is the case anytime you're putting something into or onto your body, you want to make sure you do your research first, and that you're using both the appropriate dosages and the appropriate herbs. And on that note, another warning, if you are buying dried herbs, make sure those herbs are sourced properly. I have been to witchy shops that sell herbs under their popular name, but when you actually double check the Latin name of the actual plant they're selling, it's not what you think it is. So if you are just beginning to collect herbs, or you're interested in getting some things that are slightly harder to find that you're not going to just pick up off the shelf at your local grocer, I definitely suggest sourcing them from responsible growers, people who have a good reputation, among customers who actually know what it is they're looking for. Now, the individual teas you use during this sort of ceremony are entirely up to you, but there are a few things that I like to do to kind of smooth the transition between teas. I'm often looking for quite a range of gustatory and olfactory experiences, so whatever flavor palette I begin with, I will end up somewhere quite different, and that can be a jarring experience. One trick is to have common elements running throughout your spread, throughout your selection. In this case, you'll notice that the first 2 teas that I make contain honey, and once again, that second tea, which contains chamomile, well, that chamomile I carry over into the third tea. In the first cup because elderberry is quite tart and benefits from a little bit of sweet. In the second because I'm basically making a hot toddy there. And of course the second tea contains chamomile, as does the third. However, in the second tea, the chamomile is really front and center in terms of flavor profile, whereas in the third it's very subtle compared to the flavor of mugwort. And so in this particular case, I'm going from quite fruity, light tea to something a little stronger, and finally ending up in a very, very earthy flavor profile. Of course, you don't need to be mixing your own herbs and blends. It is absolutely okay to do this with artisanal tisanes you buy in a store. And you can have quite a lot of fun going in and selecting a series of teas that you can use for exactly this purpose. If you want to do so, I encourage you to be as adventurous as possible. Get a wide range. I get the most bang for my buck when the teas that I use are wildly different. And as you can see, I embraced the use of alcohol in ritual. And in this case, this little bit of scotch that I'm using will add a peaty note to the second tea that will further help carry that over into the third. Once you're all set, you can simply add boiling water and steep. Another thing I wanted to note is that if you're going to be doing this pathworking over a significant amount of time, you might want to taper when you add water to each of your teas so that the last one you get to isn't cold. So fill the first couple glasses and then let those steep for X number of minutes before adding water to the last so that it's not stone cold by the time you get to it. All right, so at this point, I am going to let you go, do my thing, and I'll be back in a bit. Some additional notes. You don't have to feel compelled to finish every cup in its entirety. Over the course of your pathworking, feel free to drink only as much as you need to, only as much as you want. The idea is to transition when it's appropriate to transition. While pathworking with your tea, I encourage you to hold your cup right up under your nose. Inhale through your nose deeply to get that olfactory experience, occasionally sipping. I personally don't find that drinking over the course of the pathworking really interferes with my capacity to visualize and stay in the moment and stay in the ideal psychological state. If this is something you find tricky at first, I think you'll find with just a little bit of practice it'll become natural, because for good or ill, consuming things is something that we can do pretty unconsciously. So I think learning to incorporate that into something that is more meditative is entirely possible. As you get to know different herbs, different herbal blends more intimately, you can of course carry the use of those teas over into different aspects of your craft. They can be used to supplement spell work. You can use them with different cards in order to create a kind of bridge between the two, a sensory experience that links your prior pathworking with your current one. For those who may be more inclined towards cocktails than teas, I'd like to give a shout out to the New City Witches Cocktail Coven. Google them online. They have a collection that's pretty expansive of all sorts of really fun cocktails that are thematic and cute. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little video, and do let me know if you try this out. I would definitely enjoy hearing your impressions and your experiences. As always, I really appreciate you swinging by and checking this out, and I hope you have a wonderful night.